Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Before I get into this video, I'd like to ask you all to please leave a like and comment on my video. Now, in the background is the gameplay from Bubblegum First and Jose, and I will be going on to the next part of the story. Now, after we defeat the Black Garden, the next thing that occurs is we end up raiding the Vault of Glass. We end up ascending into the Vault of Glass and defeating its entire confluxes with a relic left behind by Kabir, who was one of the members of the fire team who had first tried to defeat the vault, and we end up defeating the vault in the end using his relic. Now, once we do that there and we defeat the vault, we end up getting rewards from it in the form of gear and weapons that are quite powerful. So that is our first time actually doing one of these activities. It was not part of the mainline story for the first part. However, we now end up in DLC 2, The Dark Below. A distress signal is heard, and we end up recovering a guardian from the moon who has lost her ghost. Her name is Eris Morn. She has been stuck in the dark underneath the moon for many years and finally has pulled herself out. What she has gone through is she ended up fighting one of the hive gods called Crota. And we are now in the process of actually facing off against him. And we now need to defeat him because if we don't defeat him, he will be coming through with an army to Earth to destroy us. And we basically do this here for the most part. And that is how we end up going through the first part of the story. We end up defeating his world, his first several agents of Crota directly, and this ends up leading us to find them resurrecting Crota into the physical world. We end up stopping the ritual and destroy the crystal that was housing his soul. Now, because he is an ascendant hive, he owns what is called a throne world, and we have to go into his throne world and destroy him once and for all. Now, once we complete this entire massive story, we end up going once more to the moon, and we ascend into the dark below, into the pit. And once we jump into the pit, we end up taking on several major enemies in relation to Crota. We end up defeating his ogres, we end up defeating his death singers, and then we finally take him on and we destroy him with his father's sword. And this is how Crota dies. But before he dies, he sends out a distress call in the ascendant world that he was in to his father. So we had already defeated Crota, and we end up moving on to the next set of duties that we find ourselves doing. The next thing that occurs within our solar system is we end up having this. Let's see. After them comes the whole story with the Fallen, if I am correct. Uh, yes, the next thing which happens is we end up having a massive situation with the Fallen. Now we find out that the Awoken had intervened in our great battle called Twilight Gap, avoiding the Elixni getting one of their major houses in for that battle. When they intervened, they stopped the House of Wolves from intervening, and they were then made part of the Awoken Society. However, they betrayed the Awoken Society and released one of their Khals, and their Khal is now coming for us, the Guardians. He's going to come back for the last city. However, he's going and doing a whole lot of major incidents around the system. The Queen of the Awoken gives us a mission to take down this Khal, whose name is Skolas. So we are given the mission to kill Skolas, and we are invited into the reef, into the bounties of the Awoken Society. This is the first time that we enter in, and we are introduced to Verix, the Prison of Elders, Petra, Venge, and several other key players. We are introduced to Brother Vance, who runs the Trials of Osiris. So we end up going through all of these situations, and we pursue Skolas through several incursions. He eventually tries to take over the Vex to try and make himself more powerful because he couldn't unite the various fallen houses because we kept interrupting him. And we end up defeating him when he tries to use Vex Tech to bring back his house across time and to teleport them wherever he wants for an instantaneous strike. We end up defeating him and taking him back to Marasov, and he then issues a challenge to us in form of the challenge of elders. So we end up going into the prison of elders and doing trial by combat, and we end up punishing several enemies of the prison, defeating them one by one and receiving rewards for defeating them. Basically, we were the executioners in the prison. So we end up defeating enemies from the Cabal, the Hive, and the Vex. So eventually, we end up defeating multiple instances of these enemies, and we get pushed on further to then face off against Skolas. This time, we face Skolas in a fair combat, and we defeat him. At this point, Skolas is dead, and we are then given the chance to leave the prison with bounties and rewards from the prison. Following this, a major incident occurs in our solar system. The Taken King has arrived, Crota's father Oryx. So the Hive major force has arrived, and they're arriving with a massive fleet of ships. The Awoken decide to take on this threat on the moons of Saturn, and they now move out in force. As they move out to take on this force, Mara Sov decides to engage the main ship, and she uses a massive power to wipe out most of their fleet. However, it doesn't wipe out Oryx's dreadnought, and instead Oryx activates a weapon that decimates the Awoken fleet and ends up costing Mara Sov her life. However, this is in Mara's plan. She intended for the entire fleet to be destroyed and for us to take on the Taken King, defeat him, and for her to take the power. However, this is not exactly what happens. We end up ascending onto this mission, and we push our way onto the Dreadnought. Now, when we finally make our way onto the Dreadnought, we end up taking on multiple enemies, and we end up defeating Oryx for the first time, because he has been taking enemies and perverting them into the Taken. We take on Oryx for the first time, and we defeat him in the real world. And in his throne world, and he ends up taking himself even deeper into his throne world. So Oryx has taken himself. So we then end up descending deeper into his ship, into his throne world, into the deeper parts of his ship, and we end up fighting Oryx while he is taken. And we end up defeating Oryx, and he ends up being left as a remnant over one of the moons of Saturn. And he may have crashed into it by now, but that is where the story ends for us at the end of The Taken King. We continue on with the story all the way up to the next point when we are introduced to the rise of iron. One of the old war mine functions, one of its sub-mines, was a special weapon called Siva. It awoke once in the Golden Age when Rasputin gave it the order to replicate and kill, and it ended up ending the era of the Iron Lords. There were hundreds of Iron Lords once, and now there are only 2 left in existence. So we end up helping Lord Saladin to actually attempt to control this situation. We end up entering a quarantine section of the Cosmodrome called the Plague Lands. Now, the House of Devils had attempted to actually splice themselves with Siva to make themselves more powerful. So they were interfering with Siva at this time. And we end up ascending all the way down into the replication chamber and destroying it once and for all so that Siva can't replicate ever again. At this point, we end off our mission with Lord Saladin on the basics, and we find out that the splicer was still alive in a deeper part of the bunker within the Siva complex. So we end up ascending in as well, and we end up defeating the excess mine that was created to handle Siva along with the splice priest, and that is the end for us in Destiny 1. We were then given the rank of Iron Lord. We are the first Iron Lord since a very long time ago. So we are an Iron Lord and we are a Guardian. We are one of the rare few who have that honor. We're also a champion against the darkness and the Vex. So this is where we end off the story prior to the starting of Destiny 2. Destiny 2 starts after these occurrences, and I will be going into it in the next video. So I thank you all for watching and have a good day.